Okay, let's get down to business. The way I see it, someone's out to make a sequel. You know, cash in on all the movie murder hoopla. So it's our job to observe the rules of the sequel.
How do we find the killer, Randy? That's what I want to know.
What would you do if a copycat killer strikes on your college campus? What happens when your past chases you from Woodsboro? How do you add up the clues to solve the case before it's too late? What is up, Nerd Detectives?
Hi! No, I really mean that. Hi.
Welcome back to another episode of Nerds at Night. Thank you to everyone who helped make the first video in this series a success. Y'all literally blew up this channel to over 4K subs, and I want you to know because of that, and really because of how much y'all liked the first one, that today we are breaking down the sequel to one of the best slasher horror whodunits.
Who'd want to do that? Sequels suck.
Thank you for that, Randy. But today we're talking all about... In similar fashion to our first Scream breakdown, I want to prepare you to be able to pick up all the clues the movie is giving you and help you to be able to solve who the killers are before all is revealed at the end. I'm going to take you through how this sequel works in relation to the first movie, go through all the ghostface attacks, and then we'll go through every clue the movie gave us to help us solve this case. Now, just in case you need a summary about the movie, here's a quick synopsis.
It's a dumbass white movie about some dumbass white girls getting their white asses cut the fuck up.
Now let's talk about the sequel a little bit, because before we go gathering clues to attempt to solve this case, we have to understand how it differs from its predecessor. You see, in this movie, the clues are not as in our face as they were in the first film. This mystery is in fact harder than the first, and for good reason. In order to be a good murder mystery sequel, you have to change how we got our clues and subvert expectations of how we gathered clues from the first time. This means pieces of matching wardrobe are not as evident in this movie, and narrowing down who could be an immediate suspect after an attack is also not as easy as the first one. However, this doesn't mean there aren't clues, it just means we need to pay attention to different details to solve this particular mystery. In fact, the clues in this particular sequel are broken down into two categories: deductive like the first movie, and then a new category that stands out in this sequel are visual verbal clues. We have to be on extra high alert for every line that could imply or point to a suspect being a killer.
Let's move on.
So we know we have a harder case in front of us, and we know the clues are harder for us to find. But how do we, as nerd detectives, attempt to try and isolate these clues? Well, this is where we break out our handy-dandy rules for solving a murder mystery. And what are those rules, you might ask? Rule number 1, we gotta have suspects. Rule number 2, we gotta have clues. Rule number 3, we have to have motivation. Rule number 4, we have to have opportunity. And rule number 5, we always have to have red herrings. We use all of these as part of our algorithm to solve any murder mystery. One more thing to keep in mind about murder mysteries is in all cases we meet the killer in Act 1. This means if we get introduced to some weird character after about the 30 or 40 minute mark, we know no matter how suspicious they might be, they will always be a red herring and will never ever be the killer. Additionally, like any good murder mystery, there is always a sleuth or detective character who's often the hero of the book or the movie, but in this film and in the franchise, it's not our lead. Our lead and hero, much like the first, is still Sidney Prescott. So who is our sleuth slash detective character? Again, this honor goes to our favorite leading news reporter,
Gail Weathers, star of the Gail Weathers press conference, based on the book by Gail Weathers, soon to be a major motion picture starring Gail Weathers.
In this movie yet again, she's consistently the only one sneakily trying to gather information and puts things together, if only slightly before the rest of the characters. And yes, this continues throughout the franchise. But in this particular film, she serves a greater purpose by leading us to one of the killers. You'll see what I mean as I break this movie down further. Now that we know the rules, let's dig into this and find every clue at Scream 2 that this movie laid out in front of us to solve this mystery the whole time. So grab a popcorn, grab a beer, or grab a whiskey, and let us begin.
Give me some money. I need to get some popcorn.
You got money.
I got my money. I asked for your money.
Now, much like the last time, we're going to start with the end of the movie, then we're going to work our way through all the murders just in case it's been a while since you've seen it. So let's start with the big reveal. Spoiler alert in case you haven't seen this movie, because if you haven't seen it, I'm not saying I'm mad, I'm just saying I'm disappointed in you. But if that's the case, feel free to pause this, watch Scream 2, and come back. Now, for those of us who have seen it, let's start with the reveal. We find out the killer was Mickey.
Surprise, Sydney.
Who has some unorthodox motivation for going on a killing spree.
See, I've got my whole defense planned out. I'm gonna blame the movies.
And additionally, as our second killer, we have...
Gail. Mrs. Loomis?
Whose motivation isn't as modern as Mickey's. Her motivation is instead...
You killed my son.
And now I kill you, and I can't think of anything more rational.
So now that we know who did it, let's rewind a bit and go through all the murders and Ghostface attacks just so they're fresh on our minds. The movie and the killings all kick off at the movies where a couple, Phil and Maureen, are given sneak passes to watch Stab, the in-universe version of Scream based on the events from the prior movie. Phil takes a potty break and finds out it's not nice to snoop on people in the stalls.
Sorry, this might be a dumb question, but where are you right now?
I'm in the toilet taking a shit.
The killer then puts on Phil's jacket and surprises Maureen as she's watching Stab.
See, if that was me, I would be out of there.
Our next attack takes place at night where the killer calls Cece. He harasses her over the phone and ends up making his way into the sorority house.
Bitch, hang the phone up and star 69 his ass. Damn.
Then he surprises her in person, chases her, and finally finishes her from the top floor of the house. Shortly after this, the killer calls the empty post-party sorority house as Sydney is leaving, and Ghostface also manages to surprise her as well. He chases her around the house and manages to escape as she runs away outside, but not before attacking Derek. We next see the killer stalk Sydney during dress rehearsal for the new play she's starring in.
Yo, leave her alone.
This is shortly followed by the killer calling Gail, speaking to Randy and the gang searching for the killer in the park area. This leads to one of the most infamous deaths in the Scream franchise. R.I.P. Randy, you'll always be our angel. We next see Ghostface being a peeping Tom on Dewey and Gail.
I am black. Yeah. I'm not gonna lie.
This leads to what is perhaps one of the top two most suspenseful scenes of the franchise as Ghostface chases Gail through a maze of sound reduction walls in the recording studio. Ghostface isn't done with their bullshit yet as they attack Dewey and try one more time to reach Gail. They next attack and kill Sydney's security detail, all while crashing Sydney's Uber to the safe house.
Obviously, I knew I was gonna get a 1 star.
And in what has to be the #1 most suspenseful scene of the franchise, Sydney and Hallie both have to escape out of the car by climbing through the broken cage separator and over the killer to try and reach the only open window in the car. Once they escape, Sydney wants to go back to see who the killer is before the ending, but...
Oh shit. What?
Goodbye, Hallie. We next see Ghostface as he pops up while Sydney is trying to untie Derek, and he reveals himself to be Mickey.
Surprise, Sydney.
Then Mickey gaslights Sid into thinking that Derek was his partner, but then kills him and reveals the second killer is actually Miss Loomis.
You two are in this together?
Yeah, well, had to have financing. Tuition's expensive.
Miss Loomis decides she wants to be a solo villain and Gail gets caught in the crossfire. Also to top it off, Cotton pops in to figure out what's going on and starts to look awfully sus, but we find out he just wants to ask Sydney one question.
Bet you that Diane Sawyer interview's looking real good right about now.
Cotton ends up saving the day, and I'd say that's about it, right?
Can somebody get me out of here?
So much for reporting from the trenches, huh?
Shut up, Cotton.
Jeez, Gail, you got more lines than a cat.
Also, Dewey didn't get stabbed so bad, so I guess we'll see him in Scream 3. Now that we've recapped the attacks, let's take all the information that we know and look at all the clues the movie's laid out in front of us to solve this mystery the whole time. Let's start from the beginning and go through all of our deductive clues. What can we tell from this first attack? Well, we know the killer knew Maureen and Phil would be at the movies, but how did he know? Well, let's piece some things together. 1, we're told in a later scene that Maureen and Phil were at a sneak preview of Stab. 2, the audience seems to all be around their age. This opens up the possibility that many students at Windsor College were given sneak passes to see Stab. This could possibly be confirmed when Sydney gets a prank call from someone who saw the movie the night before, as there was more than one showing of it.
Hot flash, Corey. Prank calls are a criminal offense prosecuted under Penal Code 653M.
This much is confirmed as we see people running around the lobby, presumably to watch Stab in a different theater room. But none of this answers the question of how the killer knew Maureen and Phil were going to the movies, and specifically what time and which movie theater. There may be a good answer though. Zach Cherry has a great theory on his Who Killed Who video and theorizes a student who is a killer gave them the tickets. I believe it was either that or Phil received tickets along with another student for the same showing. Either way, this now implies our killer, or one of our killers, is indeed a student. Our next clue comes to us in film theory class as the topic turns to violence in cinema and the effects on society. The students seem to be engaging in a fun debate, but Mickey has interesting thoughts on what's happening.
Classic case of life imitating art, imitating life. With all due respect, the killer obviously patterned himself after 2 serial killers who have been immortalized on film.
Thank you.
If we add up just a few things so far, we know that our killer is likely a student at the same college Maureen and Phil attended. And now we see one of these students saying the previous killers are immortalized and is defending sequels. So far to me, that seems
suspicious as fuck.
Also, as a tidbit of trivia for this scene, there's a line of dialogue that feels just a bit off in this moment right here.
T2.
You got a hard on for Cameron.
Why did Cece say that? If we noticed previously, it was a completely different student who names a different James Cameron movie.
Aliens. Far better than the first.
So why is this line here?
You got a hard on for Cameron.
And how does it make sense? Well, what if I said this scene was reshot to add more lines for Sarah Michelle Gellar? And in the original version, both James Cameron sequels are indeed named by Mickey.
Many sequels have surpassed their original.
Name one.
Aliens. Far better than the first.
Name another.
T2.
Someone's got a hard on for Cameron.
Which now makes sense why the line is in there in the first place. Now let's get back from the trivia and get back to our clues. We next meet an interesting character named Debbie Salt, who seemingly idolizes Gale Weathers, but she comes off a bit clingy and pushy.
I took your seminar in Chicago. Last year, I was the one in the front row, asking all the questions.
But notice something very interesting. When the media gathers to ask the chief questions about the recent killings, Debbie is tucked away on the far side of the media, away from the cameras, and also far away from where anyone would notice her and definitely out of the line of sight of Sydney. If she were to be seen this early on, then the plan to take revenge on Sydney would be ruined.
Clever girl.
Our next clue is noticing who is around when Sydney gets invited to the party. You see, we know later on Sydney gets attacked once the party clears out, but in order to attack her, the killer had to know she was going to be attending in the first place. This immediately narrows it down to Derek, Hallie, and our most suspected suspect so far.
Mickey, the freaky Tarantino film student.
Our next clue comes once Cece gets a phone call from Ghostface. Remember, this is the 90s, so before you could just Google phone numbers for businesses or sorority houses, you had to use the phone book. This now likely means if the killer had the phone number for the sorority house, they would have access to a campus phone book that had the sorority's phone number, which points the finger even more to our killer being a student at the same college. Our next clue comes to us very subtly, but watch this. We see the killer enter the house, and then knows how to reach the closet on the far side of the house. How would someone know to do that unless they've been in the house before? And what's one of the biggest reasons to go into a sorority house? If you said party, you'd be correct. Much like the party currently going on at a sorority house down the street, which is now even more proof that our killer or one of our killers is very likely a student at the same college Cece attends. Our next clue is slightly subtle, but notice how the killer is on the phone with Cece and her roommate, while at the same time we see the killer sneaking into the sorority house. Notice the killer is not holding a phone, and again, Bluetooth wasn't a big thing at this point in time, so this is one of the biggest clues telling us there's more than one killer. Our next clue is a small clue, but it's shown to us if you pay attention. You see, 2 out of 3 of the people we know who knew Sydney was going to be at the party show up. We know one of them has to be suspicious, but in the moment, we're unsure of who. This next clue is very subtle and easily missed, and that is Debbie Salt happens to be one of the first reporters on the scene news-wise. She gets some solid info from the chief and some good details, but she doesn't give them to Gale?
So it's definitely not suicide. Thank you. Gail, hi, you're just getting here. It's not good.
If Gale is someone she idolizes, why didn't she hang out long enough to discuss the case with her?
That's suspicious. That's weird.
That's what reporters do, Dewey. They stage the news.
Our next clue comes in the form of how the killer attacks Sydney in the house and is able to escape without being seen. Likely they know the layout of the space because, back to our original guess, they would have likely been there for a party. Also, if we're narrowing down our list of suspects based on 2 guests showing up from earlier, one ends up getting attacked and cut, and the other is MIA. These next clues come to us as throwbacks to a pattern that indicates the kills may be based on the original Woodsboro murders.
Do you think someone's trying to duplicate Woodsboro?
It looks like it.
Now, who would have known the names of people in Woodsboro? We do know Gale has released her popular book, The Woodsboro Murders, so anyone could know past victims' names.
Well, it just seems to me that if the killer is repeating what happened in Woodsboro, it's quite possible that the killer could be from Woodsboro.
But who would have the savvy enough to know current victims' names to create a pattern of kills based on names? This highly indicates a student on campus is the killer, and just when we thought we could doubt that, let's ask one question.
Is Cece the girl's real name?
No, it's Casey.
As in Casey Becker?
Maureen and Phil don't seem to have nicknames, but who would have known Cece's real name? Maybe someone who went to the same college? Let's get a bit more specific. Maybe someone who was in the same class with her. Right after this scene, we get a very small clue. You see, Debbie Salt is the local reporter woman, but this question raises a big flag for me.
What about this ex-cop Dewey Riley? It's kind of strange that he showed up.
Yeah, what's he doing here?
Now, why would she ask Gale this when Dewey walked right past her and she could have just asked him? Either Debbie is a horrible reporter who's just reporting on TMZ gossip, or she's just using these questions as a way to torment Gale, specifically because she's the killer and has a devious motive to keep antagonizing her. Our next few clues come from this interaction right here.
Derek, I think Sue will let me interview her for my documentary.
So this means Mickey's actively recording, right? Also, what is he doing a documentary on? I have a lot of questions about Homeboy. Also, we get this line.
Have you checked out Randy? What? I know he's an innocent victim first time around, but he's a little off, you know what I'm saying?
Let's think back to the first time Mickey did something like this.
Why would anyone go back in that house anyway?
This is now the second time Mickey implicates another character to be placed on the suspect list. Much like the school playground rules about farting, he who smelt it, dealt it. Our next clue comes after Sydney is stalked during dress rehearsal. Who would have access to the stage and could still blend in with everyone? The answer is clearly a student. Let's add some more context to this though. You see, Derek comes to comfort Sid after the attack, but Sid has an interesting question for him.
Derek, how long have you been here?
I just got here. Is everything okay? What's going on?
What happened to Mickey?
Here's what we're missing to get a legit answer. In a deleted scene, Sydney's friends make a schedule to watch Sydney to be her escort to different classes throughout the day. Mickey is supposed to be watching Sydney after Hallie, which is during the time of Sydney's dress rehearsal. But when he doesn't show up and Derek is asked about why he's there, he says this.
What happened to Mickey?
We swapped. He had to edit. You get me instead. What happened?
So we know Mickey is a student and he's now unaccounted for while Sydney is stalked on stage during dress rehearsal. Very interesting, because now we're all definitely suspecting
Mickey, the freaky Tarantino film student.
Our next clue comes from the call that was meant for Gail that Randy intercepts, and we all know how that goes. But let's ask one question. Why is the killer calling Gail and not any of the other survivors? Why does Gail matter in this moment? Let's think about this from a very base level. Who did Gail piss off to entice them to want to call her? Well, let's go through who Gail has interacted with. There's Joel the cameraman, but she keeps gaslighting him to make sure he stays on board.
I want to report the news. I don't want to be the news.
The story is monumental. Don't you want to be a part of that? I need you. I cannot do this without you.
There's Dewey, who has Taylor Swift history with her.
'Cause baby, now we got bad blood.
But he's with her when she receives the call, so it can't be him. Then there's Cotton and Sid, but Sid got her revenge.
Sydney, share with us, please. I'll share with you.
And Cotton is more like Milton from Office Space at this point.
Okay, I set the building on fire.
So who else has Gail interacted with? Well, there is.
I'm Debbie Salt. I took your seminar in Chicago.
And Gail has been, well, not nice would be a generous statement.
Begin quote.
Great.
Your flattering remarks are both desperate and obvious. End quote. I'm not here to do your job, Miss Salt. Dewey's a good guy. Unlike some of us.
Really?
So maybe it's the person you pissed off, Gail, but what do I know? I'm just the narrator. Also, again, R.I.P. Randy. Additionally, we get our glimpse of classic Ghostface kicks, aka the Ghost Force ones. As a side note, up until now, we've only had one other character rocking black boots. Looks like Wes is back to his old tricks.
To Wes! Beautiful son of a bitch.
Our next clue comes when Sydney is in the library and gets a threatening instant message. This yet again implies one of our killers must be a student, as they would be the only ones who have credentials to access the library college database to be able to send a message like this.
You have an instant message, that's all. Just hit Alt-Tab.
Yeah, but I'm not signed on.
Someone here in the library, all the terminals are connected.
Additionally, we get a very suspicious interaction with Cotton, who's repping Sydney's college on his hoodie, and also has a suspicious piece of wardrobe.
You were so instrumental in my freedom. You're not having character doubts now, are you?
Another clue comes from our not-so-favorite local news writer, Debbie Salt, who suspiciously is not part of the crowd to get a quote from Cotton Weary after he's released by the local law enforcement. But why? The big current story for any news outlet, big or small, is covering Cotton's release over trying to get a quote from Gail. And again, even when Debbie gets bitched out by Gail, notice how she doesn't even try to get a quote from Cotton. Again, she's either legitimately horrible at her job, or she's just here to keep being annoying and antagonizing to Gail because, again, she is the killer and is wearing Gail down by playing the long psychological game. Our next set of clues come to us in the scene when Dewey and Gail go through Joel's footage and get touchy-feely, only to be interrupted by footage showing up that's not Joel's. Now let's pause here because this should have been the nail in the coffin for who we should have suspected was at least one of the killers. You see, if we watch the footage, we can see it was shot with someone's camera, but who else had a camera besides Joel? Again, this is a murder mystery, and murder mysteries always give us the answer ahead of time. So let's think back to the only character we saw with the camera besides Joel.
She had calf implant.
Who's that guy? Derek? I think Sid will let me interview her for my documentary.
That's right. By this point, we should have known one of the killers is
Mickey, the freaky Tarantino film student.
This is doubly verified as we know it would have to be a student who would know how to run the equipment to get the video to display on the second TV next to Dewey and Gail. But when did he have time to edit this if he's busy killing people? We'll come back to that, I promise. Let's return to the scene. As Dewey's looking for the killer in the control room, he doesn't find anyone, but the killer finds Gail and attacks her. But it's during this attack we get a very subtle clue. Listen close. Did you hear that? Listen one more time. Clearly, this is a woman's grunt, and if the killer at this point is not Sydney, Gail, Hallie, or the sorority sisters, whose voice could that be?
I'm Debbie Salt. I took your seminar in Chicago.
Let's keep moving on. Again, during one of the most intense scenes in the franchise, Gail is avoiding being found by Ghostface, but it's when Dewey is trying to get her attention, we're given another clue. Whose pizza was that in the studio? Because it looks rather fresh. Let's think about this for a second, because we've already been given 2 clues that will help us narrow this down. Which student would have access to a room like this and could use it? Let's ask ourselves who's been missing for about the last 30 minutes of the movie now. Which student would need access to the technology in this room to further drive their plan forward? Remember when I said this? But when did he have time to edit this if he's busy killing people? We'll come back to that, I promise. That's the line. Well, if a video needed to be edited, which character can be accounted for because they needed to do some editing in a room like this?
What happened to Mickey?
We swapped. He had to edit. You get me instead.
That's right, it's
Mickey, the freaky Tarantino film student.
If that's not enough proof, let's add up some more clues. As Sid is leaving campus, it's here we get another clue. You see, Sid's escape Uber is attacked and hijacked by the killer, but let's again step back and think who would even know she's leaving campus in the first place? See, the first we hear of Sydney going to a safe house, the main characters in the room are Dewey, Sid, Hallie, and Gail. Let's account for all of them right now. See, Dewey and Gail are being attacked by Ghostface, so now Sid and Hallie are attacked by Ghostface, so it can't be them. Then the next person who finds out is Derek, and well, Derek is currently, indisposed at the moment. So who else would know? Well, there is. I mean, that would be crazy. Okay, I'll tell you. What if Hallie told her boyfriend that she was leaving with Sid? Well, now this all makes sense because we do indeed find out it was Mickey who attacked and hijacked the girl's car, and he has the bumps and bruises to show he was there.
You're a psychotic. Yeah, well, shh. That'll be our little secret.
Returning to campus, we get a big clue as we see Debbie is close to the attack on Dewey and Gail. If we believe Cotton's story in the moment,
This isn't what it looks like. I found Dewey. I tried to help him. No, Gail, wait, Gail!
then the finger should automatically point to Debbie Salt, as she is a character we have met in the first act of the movie with a fair amount of screen time and is also in the vicinity of the attacks. For a bonus clue in this section, it appears she's on the phone with someone too. Let's listen in.
Curfew in full effect. Meanwhile,
Who is she talking to this late at night? We know she's not booed up, so I think we can all assume she's on the phone with her partner in crime.
Surprise, Sydney.
Our last clue comes in this scene. We see that someone is setting up the theater as if to put on a performance, but who could be doing this? Again, who would have access to the stage and who would know how to run the equipment? All signs point to it being a student, which means if we haven't figured it out by now, for sure one of the students has to be a killer, and we've got a prime suspect at the top of our list.
Mickey, the freaky Tarantino film student.
Now let's move on to the various verbal and visual hints the movie gives us to help point us in the direction of the killer before the big reveal. The way we receive these clues very much separates it from its predecessor and increases the difficulty of solving this case unless they are caught. While the deductive clues are nothing new to us, the amount of verbal clues are. Most of these lines go right under the radar and would definitely stand out more if Scream 2 was a murder mystery book. Let's go through these series of clues and see what we could have missed the first time around. Our first clue is one that's subtly brought up throughout the movie, so let's see if we can spot a theme here.
When my mom left my dad, I accepted it. That's the way the cookie crumbles. Mrs. Voorhees was a terrific serial killer.
I should call his mother.
I already made that phone call.
It really appears the movie is trying to tell us the theme of mothers is important for us to properly crack this case.
Moms leave.
Yeah, your mom left town. She's not buried in a cemetery somewhere.
Whether it's casual mentions of the word mother or mom, or in the case of the scene from the Stab movie, is the movie's way of highlighting to us that while this clue may be mundane, it could actually be the key to telling us who one of the killers are. This mother theme is verified during the reveal at the end as Nancy Loomis says this.
all he needed was a little guidance and nurturing.
As only a mother can do.
And this.
I was a good mother. You don't know what it is to be a mother. To raise a child and teach him.
Our next clue is something we lightly touched upon earlier, and it's the fact that while Mickey's in class, he takes a defensive stance that sequels can be better than the originals.
Bullshit generalization. Many sequels have surpassed their original.
Oh, yeah?
Name one.
T2.
You've got a hard on for Cameron.
I got it, by the way. I got it. The Godfather, Part 2.
That's the Oscar-winning example.
This continues even after class when he says this to Randy.
Empire Strikes Back. Better story, improved effects.
Not a sequel, part of a trilogy completely planned.
Mickey's still trying to form an argument that sequels are better, which completely makes sense as he is the killer and would want to surpass the bar set by Billy and Stu.
With all due respect, The killer obviously patterned himself after 2 serial killers who have been immortalized on film.
Thank you.
Our next set of verbal clues comes to us very subtly from Dewey as he catches up with Sid.
If there is some freaked out psycho trying to follow in Billy Loomis's footsteps, you probably already know him. Or her.
Dewey points out not only to Sid, but to us the audience that in this case, the killer may be a her, which is exactly what happens by the end of the movie. He also mentions the fact the killer is probably already in her life, which is an interesting bit of foreshadowing, as once we take a look at the bigger picture, we realize Mickey is in Sydney's life and is following her from place to place, which makes sense. All of the attacks around her are done by him. The other side of the coin is that Miss Loomis has a similar task and is now in Gail's life, and is tasked with following her around, which means we can also conclude that all the attacks that happen around Gail or to Gail are done by Miss Loomis. In basketball, this is what would be referred to as man-on-man defense. Our next clue comes to us in this line.
Hello?
See, this line really delivers on 2 fronts. One, Ghostface is basically telling Sydney they are back. But going deeper than that for our second point, we can assume this is actually Miss Loomis on the phone making the calls, as we know it was likely Mickey who killed Cece, and that there had to be another person calling, which could only mean Miss Loomis was talking to Cece. Once we realize it's Miss Loomis asking Sydney if she remembers her, this moment carries so much more impact. Our next clue comes to us in this line from the hospital.
I'll be with you in a few minutes, okay?
No problem.
It's the easiest interrogation of my crime-filled life.
Whoa, what exactly was Mickey doing before college? While we never get an answer, we do get this line.
We met on the internet, psycho website, classifieds.
There's only an estimated 97 active serial killers in the country today, so Mickey here was quite a find.
This implies Mickey has already been doing some pretty sinister stuff and has gotten away with it up until this point. If we paid attention to Mickey telling us he had a crime-filled life, we should have had him at the top list of our suspects the whole time. The next clue is very subtly done, but see if you can catch it.
Dewey's a good guy. Unlike some of us.
Really?
The edit after Gail delivers her line is indeed intentional, and as we look back, it feels like such a sly way of the movie pointing the finger to Debbie Salt not being a good guy, which we definitely find out is true as she reveals herself to be one of the killers. And now we get to the scene that many of y'all been waiting for that's loaded with clues. Randy's Breakdown Part 2. The movie's meta way of informing us what to expect from this movie and who should be at the top of our list as a potential killer.
The way I see it, someone's out to make a sequel. You know, cash in on all the movie murder hoopla. Number 1. The body count is always bigger. Number 2, the death scenes are always much more elaborate. Let's look at the suspects. There's Derek, the obvious boyfriend. Hello, Billy Loomis.
So you think it's Derek?
Forget the boyfriend. It's tired. Who else do we got?
There's
Mickey, the freaky Tarantino film student.
serial killers are typically white males.
That's why it's perfect. It's sort of against the rules, but not really. Mrs. Voorhees was a terrific serial killer.
Gail's no killer.
Okay, whatever you say. But if she's not a killer, she's a target.
The next clue is done in such a tricky way by Wes Craven, but once you see it, you'll never unsee it. In the scene where Sydney is doing her dress rehearsal, we see she is stalked and attacked, but once the rehearsal is halted, we see this.
All right, hold it.
As everyone is taking off their mask, we notice one looks very similar to a Ghostface mask, and the wearer is a woman. This is such a small yet huge clue for us, as it's literally the movie's way of telling us one of the killers is a woman, and foreshadows the reveal will additionally be on this stage as well.
Doesn't that blow your mind?
Our next set of clues comes to us in the moments we see Miss Loomis in full Debbie Salt mode.
Well, it just seems to me that if the killer is repeating what happened in Woodsboro, it's quite possible that the killer could be from Woodsboro. That's all.
The line seems very small and a bit out of nowhere, but it's the movie's way of helping us open our mind to the fact that we may have to think back to who aside from our core group of characters is also from Woodsboro and could be doing this. Additionally, when we hear this line,
It must be scary knowing somebody's out there waiting and watching, enjoying all this. How does that make you feel?
at the time we should ask, how would Debbie Salt know what the killer is thinking? And why would she ask Gail this question? Knowing what we know now, we realize this is almost a blanketed provoking question designed intentionally to mess with Gail mentally and antagonize her. And our final clue is something we should have noticed about the killer all along. Let's see if you can spot it. Did you notice which hand the killer is holding the knife in? That's right, the left hand. But what does this have to do with anything, Blake? What if I said it's because...
Everything's traceable back to Mickey.
You see, in a deleted scene, we get an interesting tidbit of information.
And from the angle of the knife wounds, they know the killer's left-handed.
You're left-handed, aren't you?
Yes, I am. But look, Hallie is also left-handed.
Now that we know Mickey is left-handed, this all makes sense why the killer always holds the knife in his left hand. Even when Randy is attacked, if we notice long enough, the reflection in the mirror is actually showing the killer is stabbing with their left hand. But if this was Miss Loomis who killed Randy, as she mentioned here,
Randy spoke poorly of Billy, and I got a little knife happy.
why would she do this? It was all in an effort to create uniformity amongst the attacks and to throw off the police so they wouldn't suspect there are two killers. This is why Miss Loomis says,
No, of course I will. Everything's traceable back to Mickey.
it's not just a figure of speech, it's because this whole series of attacks has been calculated and planned and all the evidence points to Mickey. And if Miss Loomis's plan works out correctly,
But let's just suppose that you had gotten hold of the other cop's gun and you shot Mickey. Killed Mickey dead. But not before he got off one shot at you.
she's able to take her revenge and make the great escape all without getting caught.
Let him try and track down the second possible killer. Debbie Salt doesn't exist.
Miss Loomis's plan to trap Sydney was thoughtful. She infiltrated Sydney's friend group through Mickey and used the disguise of Debbie Salt as a way to orbit around Gale. While never pressing too hard, she made a conscious effort to avoid any contact with Sydney, but also still wanted to tease and torment her.
Hello?
The plan also included not only being in Gale's line of sight, but annoying her and antagonizing her every chance she got. However, this movie is our ally and gives us the smallest of clues along the way through lines of dialogue. But like any good murder mystery, even if the difficulty level is raised, the clues are around us to help us solve the case the whole time.
Okay, so have I covered everything? Are there any questions, any comments?
And that, my fellow nerdtectives, are all the clues you missed in Scream 2.
Did you get that all film? Yes, I got that on film.
How did y'all do finding the clues I mentioned? Were there some new ones that made you want to go back and watch this again? Were there any clues you think I missed? If so, let me know in the comments. This was honestly such a fun rewatch because when I approached this movie the first time I broke it down, I could tell finding clues wasn't going to be as easy as it was in the first movie. But after many rewatches, the clues started showing up and becoming more and more obvious. I know I said last time it was my longest time writing a script and researching, but this one clearly has been my longest time. So I want to apologize for the delay as well. This summer's been busy with work and planning out my son's baptism, my birthday, my sister's birthday. There's just been a lot of things that have pulled me in a whole bunch of directions. But with that said, I'm happy to be back and happy to be able to finally put this all together. I'll be getting started on Scream 3, but in the meantime, I have a reaction to Sorority Row I'll be dropping soon, so just look out for that. Also, if you're a fan of murder mystery shows, I'll be covering season 4 of Only Murders in the Building week by week, so look out for that. Also, if you're on the channel, feel free to check out any of the past murder mystery breakdowns I've done. Also, I just want to give every person who's watching this the biggest shout out in the world. You guys helped take this small channel to over 4K subscribers, and the whole team and I cannot express our gratitude enough. So thank you times 1,000 for stopping by and saying hi to us. This might sound cliche, but it really does mean more than I can even put into words. If you're watching this and not subscribed, please take 2 seconds and just allow us to keep entertaining you week by week. Feel free to also follow our team's other channels, including the Drunk Banthas, where they do amazing work here every Monday and drop some amazing movie breakdowns. Also, while you're following them, feel free to follow our team's other channel, 9 Nerd Yards, which is actually the channel we blossomed from as a team to make Nerds at Night. And if you're still interneting after all that, you can feel free to follow me at Money Blake Weather on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and Snapchat. I would be super stoked to hear from all of y'all. Well, this has been another fun ride with y'all, but for now, I'm off to keep working in the nerd cave.
Now, if you'll excuse me, I have some oozing to do.
Also remember, Stu killed Tatum, not Billy. So whether it's morning, evening, afternoon, whatever time you're listening to this, I do appreciate you. And until the next case, I will see ya. Peace.